50 things only those who grew up in the 1980s remember. Part 2. 1. Dialing a rotary phone, messing up the last digit, and having to start over. Before the era of speed dial and touchscreens, making a phone call was a test of patience. You had to carefully spin the rotary dial for each digit, wait for it to return, and repeat. But the real frustration, messing up the last number and having to start all over again. The sound of the dial clicking back was oddly satisfying, but also a cruel reminder that there were no shortcuts. And if someone had a phone number full of 9s or 0s, good luck. But if dialing a phone was tricky, just imagine navigating early internet connections. 2. The screeching sound of a 2400 baud modem connecting to Prodigy or CompuServe.
So simple. Even my sister Helen can do it. Now you can...
Back in the 80s, getting online wasn't instant. It was an event. You had to listen to the chaotic symphony of beeps, static, and high-pitched screeches as your modem desperately tried to connect. And heaven forbid someone picked up the phone mid-connection. Your session would be gone in a heartbeat. Sites loaded at a snail's pace, but we didn't care. Accessing early message boards and chat rooms felt like unlocking a secret world. The wait was worth it. Of course, back then, we also had to wait for another thing. Rewinding our VHS tapes after a movie night. 3. Thinking that touching the metal pins of an NES cartridge would ruin it forever.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can play it on my Nintendo Entertainment System. It's the legend of...
Every NES owner had a ritual. Insert the game, press it down, and hope it worked. If it didn't, blow on the cartridge like a seasoned technician, even though it probably did more harm than good. But nothing struck fear into an 80s kid more than accidentally touching the metal pins on the cartridge. We were convinced that a single fingerprint could corrupt an entire game, sending Mario, Zelda, or Contra into oblivion. Looking back, it was mostly a myth. But if video games were a big deal, so were the clothes we wore while playing them. 4th, LA Gear sneakers with neon-colored laces that glowed in the dark. If you had LA Gear sneakers in the 80s, you were automatically cool. These weren't just shoes. They were a statement. With their bright neon laces, flashy designs, and glow-in-the-dark accents, they turned every hallway into a runway. Bonus points if you double-layered your laces with 2 colors. Whether you were breakdancing, biking, or just showing off at school, LA Gear made sure you stood out. And let's be honest, our obsession with neon didn't stop at sneakers. Our fashion choices were as bold as our taste in entertainment. And speaking of entertainment, let's talk about VHS tapes. 5. Inserting a VHS tape into the VCR and having to manually rewind it with a car-shaped rewinder. There was no greater disappointment than renting a VHS tape and realizing it wasn't rewound. Sure, your VCR could do the job, but serious movie lovers had a car-shaped rewinder, a dedicated machine that sped things up and looked awesome doing it. Pressing the tape in and hearing the rapid whirring was oddly satisfying. It was like a pit stop for your favorite movies. And if you forgot to rewind before returning a rental, Blockbuster charged you a fine, making Be Kind Rewind more than just a suggestion. But speaking of rentals, do you remember those epic McDonald's play areas? 6. The giant plastic hamburger play structures at fast food joints like McDonald's that you could climb inside. Forget modern indoor play places. McDonald's playgrounds in the 80s were wild. The most legendary piece, the massive hollow plastic hamburger, you could climb inside. Sitting in there, peeking through the bars and pretending to be trapped in a burger prison was peak childhood entertainment. And let's not forget the Mayor McCheese and Officer Big Mac jail cells, because apparently McDonaldland had crime issues. We never questioned it. It was just awesome. But if you thought McDonald's had some crazy designs, even school supplies in the 80s were next level weird. 7. Plastic rulers filled with liquid and glitter that mesmerized everyone at school. Forget boring wooden rulers. If you had one of these, you were instantly cooler. These transparent rulers weren't just for measuring. They were tiny, mesmerizing lava lamps for your desk. Tilting them back and forth, watching the glitter and colorful liquid swirl around was hypnotic. Who actually used them for math? Nobody. They were fidget toys before fidget toys existed. And let's not forget the fear of accidentally breaking one and having mysterious glittery liquid leak all over your backpack. But speaking of school supplies, nothing beat the excitement of getting a prize inside your cereal box. 8. Cereal commercials where the prizes actually came inside the box, not by mail. Breakfast in the 80s wasn't just about eating, it was a treasure hunt. Cereal boxes promised actual toys. And the best part? You didn't have to mail in proof of purchase and wait 6 weeks. The prize was right there, buried in sugary goodness. Every kid had their own strategy. Some poured the whole box out, others dug their tiny hands into the cereal, while the patient ones waited until they naturally found it. From hologram stickers to glow-in-the-dark spoons, these prizes were everything. But if you thought cereal prizes were exciting, wait until you hear about Pepsi and Coke's old school cans. 9. Pepsi and Coca-Cola cans with pull tabs that completely detached and ended up everywhere.
Can somebody out there tell me why Coke did it? Why they changed? First, they said they were the real thing.
Before today's safety-conscious soda cans, we had detachable pull tabs, tiny metal rings that popped right off and turned into instant litter. They were the ultimate choking hazard, yet somehow every beach, parking lot, and schoolyard was covered in them. And if you were really cool or weird, you'd collect them on your shoelaces, making a makeshift charm bracelet. We didn't think twice about tossing them aside until someone stepped on one barefoot. That was a lesson learned the hard way. And speaking of childhood mischief, remember the gum that looked exactly like a tube of toothpaste? 10. The Hubba Bubba toothpaste-shaped bubble gum tube that tricked everyone the first time. Nothing screamed 80s kid like getting pranked by a tube of Hubba Bubba Squeeze Pop. Shaped exactly like a tube of toothpaste, it was packed with sugary liquid gum that you squeezed onto your tongue. Parents hated it, teachers hated it, and honestly, most kids hated it too, but we still begged for it at the store. It was one of those snacks that was cooler in theory than in reality. But if weird snack packaging was fun, nothing beat the absolute chaos of kids' game shows on TV. Nostalgia hits hard, doesn't it? Which of these memories takes you straight back to the 80s? Drop a comment below and make sure to subscribe. 11. Watching game shows for kids. Double Dare, Nick Arcade, Funhouse, and wondering how you could get on the show.
Red team has 25. Red team's gonna be searching one room. Blue team's gonna be searching 3 rooms.
Every 80s kid had the same dream, being a contestant on one of those ridiculously fun game shows. Whether it was sliding through slime on Double Dare, dodging virtual obstacles on Nick Arcade, or racing through the crazy obstacle course on Funhouse, we were obsessed. We screamed answers at the TV, planned our strategies, and even rehearsed how we'd grab the grand prize. But no matter how many times we watched, we never figured out how kids actually got on the show. And speaking of things we never figured out, let's talk about one of the biggest 80s myths. 12. Believing Paul from the Wonder Years was Marilyn Manson and arguing about it with friends. Before the internet, rumors spread fast. And this was one of the biggest. Everyone knew someone who swore that Paul Pfeiffer from the Wonder Years grew up to be Marilyn Manson. There was no proof, but the idea of the nerdy best friend turning into the shock rocker of the 90s was just too good not to believe. We had no way to fact check, so the argument never ended. And while we were busy debating urban legends, we were also fascinated by another mind-blowing 80s trend. Cups that actually changed color when you used them. 13. McDonald's cups that changed color based on the temperature of the drink. McDonald's in the 80s had a way of making everything feel magical, including their drink cups. These weren't just regular cups. They reacted to temperature, shifting colors when you poured in a cold soda. It was the kind of thing that seemed futuristic at the time, like some advanced McScience experiment. Kids would obsessively press their fingers against the surface, watching the color change with the warmth of their hands. It was mesmerizing. But while these cups were a fun trick, let's not forget one of the most ridiculous fashion trends of the decade. 14. Parachute pants that made a ridiculous swishing noise when you walked. Parachute pants weren't just a fashion statement, they were an experience. Made of shiny synthetic material, these baggy pants were designed for breakdancing, but we all wore them everywhere. The problem? They made an unmistakable swish-swish noise with every step, so sneaking up on anyone was impossible. And if you sat down too fast, you'd slide right off a smooth surface like you were on ice. Still, we felt unstoppable in them. But if our pants made noise, 80s toy commercials were even louder, with kids screaming about how awesome everything was. 15th. Toy commercials with kids screaming, "Super cool!" in exaggerated excitement. If you grew up in the 80s, you remember these commercials. They all followed the same formula: dramatic music, flashy lights, and kids yelling at the top of their lungs about how extreme the toy was. Whether it was an action figure, a race car, or a board game, the excitement was off the charts. The best part? The toys never worked as well as they did in the ads, but we still begged our parents for them. And speaking of things we were convinced we needed, let's talk about the weirdest childhood belief we all had. 16. The rumor that if you swallowed gum, it would stay in your stomach for 7 years. Every 80s kid knew this fact, or at least we thought we did. Swallowing gum wasn't just a mistake, it was a medical emergency. Kids would panic, imagining a growing ball of gum stuck in their stomach for the next 7 years. Parents and teachers swore it was true, reinforcing the fear. The reality? Gum doesn't digest, but it does pass through like anything else. Of course, we didn't question it. We also believed in playground myths about disappearing kids in funhouse ball pits. And speaking of childhood fears, let's talk about something truly scary: mysterious phone numbers. 17. TV ads warning that calling certain numbers would cost a fortune and get you in trouble. 976 evil. We're looking at you. Before spam calls and clickbait scams, there were 900 and 976 numbers. Mysterious phone lines that promised fortune-telling, horror stories, or a message from your favorite cartoon character. The catch? They cost a ridiculous amount per minute. Every kid saw the creepy late-night commercials daring us to call, but no one wanted to face their parents' wrath when the phone bill arrived. The worst offender? 976 EVIL, a horror hotline that sounded like a direct line to the underworld. Some brave souls called anyway. But if we thought hotlines were expensive, let's talk about the failed technology that nobody bought. 18. Betamax tapes were supposed to be better than VHS, but no one actually bought them. In the 80s, the ultimate home entertainment war wasn't PlayStation versus Xbox. It was Betamax versus VHS. Betamax had sharper picture, better sound, and smaller tapes. Yet VHS won. Why? VHS tapes could record more hours, and video rental stores stocked them instead. Kids didn't care about resolution. We just wanted to watch Ghostbusters for the 100th time. Eventually, Betamax faded into obscurity, a relic of what could have been. But if our movies were doomed to extinction, so were our books, especially if they gave us too many bad choices. 19. Choose your own adventure books, where almost every choice led to your death. These books felt like a game until you realized you were terrible at them. Every decision, from entering a cave to opening a treasure chest, seemed to end in disaster. One wrong page flip, and you'd be eaten by a monster, fall into a pit, or vanish into another dimension. Cheating was inevitable. You'd hold your fingers in multiple pages, flipping back whenever death arrived, which was always. No matter how many times we tried, we rarely got a happy ending. But if we failed at choosing adventures, we were even worse at keeping secrets, especially with notebooks that had locks. 20. Notebooks with locks that were useless because anyone could break them open. Every 80s kid who wanted to keep their thoughts private relied on a lockable notebook. It felt secure until you realized the lock was decorative at best. Any kid with a paperclip, bobby pin, or even a little patience could pop it open in seconds. Yet, we still trusted them, scribbling crushed confessions, deep thoughts, or pointless doodles inside. If anyone did manage to break in, at least they'd be met with pages covered in gel pen writing and stickers. But if notebooks were unreliable, so was ice cream that melted faster than we could eat it. 21st Flintstones, push-up pops that melted way too fast. There was nothing quite like a Flintstones push-up pop on a hot day. The bright orange tube filled with fruity, creamy ice cream seemed like the ultimate treat until reality hit. The second you pushed it up, it started melting at light speed, dripping all over your hands, your clothes, and whatever unfortunate surface was nearby. The soggy cardboard tube always got sticky, and by the end, you were frantically licking it before it collapsed completely. But somehow, we loved them, and if we thought these treats disappeared too fast, nothing vanished quite like the warnings on VHS tapes. 20-second VHS piracy warning ads with dramatic music and a black background.
Video piracy is a crime. Do not accept it. Demand a genuine cassette from your video store.
If you watched a VHS in the 80s, you remember this ad. A dark screen, an ominous voice, and a dire warning about how copying movies was a federal crime. It felt like something serious, like the FBI was watching your living room. The scary music made it feel like if you even thought about making a copy, the police would break down your door. Of course, we all ignored it, until we accidentally recorded over a family home video. But if VHS tapes had scary messages, so did another school supply. One that smelled so good, we almost wanted to eat it. 23rd, glue sticks that smelled like almonds, making kids tempted to taste them. Why did glue sticks smell so delicious? The moment you opened one, you got hit with a scent eerily similar to sweet almonds or vanilla. Some kids were convinced they were secretly edible. Spoiler, they weren't. It was a mystery why a school supply smelled like a dessert, but it didn't matter. We all gave it a cautious sniff. And if glue was tempting, so were the sneakers that had secret storage compartments, the ones every 80s kid had to own. 24. Kangaroo sneakers with tiny pockets on the sides for holding coins.
Kangaroos, 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 hallelujah.
Kangaroo sneakers were the ultimate kid shoe, not because they were stylish, but because they had a tiny zipper pocket on the side. The idea was genius. Carry coins for the arcade, a folded-up dollar, or maybe even a secret note. But in reality, the pocket was so small, it barely held anything. And if you actually tried to put in some change, you'd hear it rattling around with every step. Still, we felt cool wearing them. But if we thought our sneakers were fun, nothing was more exciting than gum that magically transformed from powder to a chewy mess. 25. The artificially sweet taste of Bubble Jug powder gum that turned into a chewy mess. Bubble Jug was a gum experience like no other. Instead of a stick or a roll, it came in powder form inside a tiny plastic jug. The first time you tried it, you had no idea what to expect. Then suddenly, the powder transformed into chewy, overly sweet gum. It was weird, but in the best way. The biggest challenge? Trying not to spill powder all over yourself when pouring it out. And if you thought a gum jug was fun, let's talk about magazines. Specifically, the ones that let you smell the product before you bought it. 26. Magazines with scented pages so you could smell perfumes before buying them. Flipping through a magazine in the 80s wasn't just about reading, it was an interactive experience. Every fashion and teen magazine had those thick, glossy pages where you could rub a perfume sample and smell it. Scents like Electric Youth by Debbie Gibson or Exclamation filled the air, making kids feel like they were part of some glamorous secret world. The problem? The smell never quite faded, so by the time you finished the magazine, it had 10 different competing scents. But if rubbing magazine pages was fun, nothing made you feel cooler than rocking a pair of fingerless gloves. 27th. Wearing fingerless gloves like Madonna in Like a Virgin. Some fashion trends made sense. This wasn't one of them. Fingerless gloves were everywhere, thanks to Madonna's edgy, punk-inspired look in Like a Virgin. Whether they were lace, mesh, or neon-colored spandex, every kid wanted a pair, even if there was zero practical reason to wear them. They weren't warm, they weren't comfortable, and honestly, they made no sense outside of a music video. But we didn't care. If Madonna wore them, they were cool. And speaking of ridiculous trends, the couches in every 80s home were just as loud as our outfits. 28. Over-the-top floral patterned sofas that everyone had in their living room. Walk into any house in the 80s and you'd see it. The giant overstuffed floral couch with huge rolled arms. These things were everywhere, covered in gaudy floral or paisley patterns that somehow never matched anything else in the room. They weren't just furniture, they were family relics that lasted forever. No matter how many juice spills, wrestling matches, or naps happened on them, they refused to die. And if you were lucky, your couch had a matching mystery grab bag from the local candy store hidden inside. 29th mystery. Grab bags from candy stores that came with random toys, stickers, and treats. Candy stores in the 80s had a genius idea, the mystery grab bag. For just a few dollars, you got a little paper bag filled with who knows what. It could be awesome. A pack of Garbage Pail Kids stickers, a cool eraser, a ring pop, or it could be junk, generic off-brand candy, and a plastic spider ring. But that was the thrill. You never knew if you'd hit the jackpot or walk away with disappointment. But if our candy stores had surprises, so did our cordless phones, with ridiculously long antennas that always broke. 30. Cordless phones with antennas that extended nearly a meter and snapped off easily.
Twist the phone cord into little knots while I talk.
Drives me crazy.
Well, this AT&T phone has great.
Owning a cordless phone in the 80s was next-level luxury. No more getting tangled in the cord while trying to walk around. The only problem? The fragile, ridiculous antenna. It extended nearly a meter, or at least it felt that long, and bent at the slightest pressure. One wrong move, snap, and suddenly you had the worst reception in history. But we still walked around the house, talking for hours, feeling important. Of course, if you had big news to share, you needed to look the part, which meant teasing your bangs into the biggest style possible. 36. Pizza Hut tables with red checkered tablecloths and Tiffany-style stained glass lamps. Going to Pizza Hut in the 80s wasn't just about eating. It was an event. The moment you walked in, you were hit with the smell of freshly baked pizza and that unmistakable retro decor. Every table had the classic red checkered tablecloths, and hanging above them, those Tiffany-style stained glass lamps with the Pizza Hut logo. You'd sit in a big booth, sip soda from a heavy glass mug, and watch your pizza arrive on a steaming pan. And if you were lucky, you got to play a tabletop arcade game while you waited, which brings us to 37. Restaurants with arcade game booths where you could play Pac-Man while waiting for your food. Before smartphones and tablets, restaurants kept kids entertained with built-in arcade machines. These weren't just regular games, they were part of the actual table. You'd sit down, put in a quarter, and play Pac-Man, Galaga, or Dig Dug right there while waiting for your pizza or burger. It made every meal feel like a special occasion. The worst part? When an adult sat at your table and blocked the screen. But even if you didn't get an arcade booth, there was always one guaranteed prize: those collectible cups from fast food joints. 38. Collectible cups from Batman, E.T., Star Wars, and the Flintstones in Burger King and McDonald's meal combos. Fast food in the 80s wasn't just about the food, it was about what came with it. Every big movie release meant one thing: collectible plastic cups. McDonald's, Burger King, and even Pizza Hut released limited edition cups featuring Batman, E.T., Star Wars, and the Flintstones. Some changed color with cold drinks, others had holographic designs, and everyone wanted a full set. The best part? Unlike cheap paper cups, these were reusable, and they'd stick around in family kitchens for years. But if our fast food cups were legendary, so were the frozen treats we couldn't get enough of. 39. Jell-O pudding pops, which were basically frozen pudding that every kid loved.
Jell-O brand pudding pops, new chocolate vanilla swirl.
Chocolate and vanilla?
Somewhere between ice cream and pudding, Jell-O pudding pops were one of the greatest snacks of the 80s. Creamy, chocolatey, and impossibly smooth, they came in classic flavors like chocolate, vanilla, and swirl. Every bite melted perfectly in your mouth, and they had a distinct texture that no other frozen treat could match. For years, they were a lunchbox favorite, until they suddenly disappeared. People still try to recreate them today, but nothing comes close to the original. And if you thought pudding pops were tough to find now, just try biting into a Now and Later without breaking a tooth. 40. Now and Later candies that were so rock hard you could crack a tooth before they softened. Now and Later's advertised themselves as chewy candy, but that was a blatant lie. The second you popped one in your mouth, it was as hard as a jawbreaker. You had two choices: risk cracking a tooth or wait until it finally softened. Hence the name. Now, hard. Later, chewy. Despite the struggle, we kept eating them, stuffing our pockets with brightly colored squares of pure dental destruction. And once you finally softened it, time to chomp down and rip it off your molars. But if candy gave us dental trauma, so did our favorite water toys that never worked as well as we hoped. 41st. Water toys with buttons that shot floating rings into place. Before smartphones and handheld consoles, we had water toys, simple plastic containers filled with liquid and tiny floating rings. The goal? Press the buttons to launch the rings onto pegs. Sounds easy, right? Wrong. These things had the worst physics imaginable. The rings would float just past the peg or bounce off, and no matter how hard you tried, getting them all in place felt impossible. Still, we were obsessed. They were quiet enough for road trips, cheap enough for parents to buy, and frustrating enough to keep us occupied for hours. But if we thought water toys were tricky, our childhoods were full of weird food inventions too. 42nd Pogo Ball, the toy that promised endless bouncing but mostly caused wipeouts.
I got the ball that lets you reach for the sky. I got the ball that lets you fly.
In theory, Pogo Ball was supposed to make you bounce like a kangaroo. In reality, it was an accident waiting to happen. A rubber ball trapped between a plastic platform, you had to balance on it and jump like a pro. The problem? It required Olympic-level coordination, and if your foot slipped, boom, straight to the ground. Still, every 80s kid had to try one. Some mastered it, others just ended up with bruised knees. But no matter how bad you were, everyone agreed that Pogo Ball commercials made it look way easier than it was. And speaking of things that were way cooler in commercials than in real life, 43. The G.I. Joe PSA commercial with the phrase, "And knowing is half the battle."
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Every G.I. Joe episode ended with a short PSA featuring the Joes teaching kids life lessons, from fire safety to avoiding strangers. The punchline? Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. These segments were so serious, but as kids, we only remembered the catchphrase. Eventually, they became a pop culture meme, with parodies showing up everywhere. Even if you never watched G.I. Joe, you knew the line by heart. But if 80s cartoons taught us important lessons, toy commercials just taught us how to beg our parents for things we didn't need. 44. Toys R Us commercials with the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid."
I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid.
The ultimate commercial for 80s kids, Toys R Us. Every holiday season, they rolled out their legendary jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." The commercial featured kids running through toy aisles, grabbing the latest action figures, board games, and bikes. If you saw it, you immediately wanted to go to Toys R Us, even if you weren't getting anything. It was pure marketing genius, and it worked. But if toys were our obsession, fast food chains knew how to turn meals into must-haves, too. 45th, McDonald's transforming toys like McDino changeables.
McDonald's McDino Changeables. 8 cool little toy dinosaurs that transform into McDonald's food things.
In the late 80s, McDonald's Happy Meals came with one of the coolest fast food toys ever, McDino changeables. These weren't just generic figures, they were McDonald's menu items that transformed into robots and dinosaurs. A Big Mac turned into a mech, a carton of fries became a raptor, and even the milkshake cup had a secret robotic form. They were essentially Transformers, but with burgers, and every kid wanted the full set. Some toys come and go, but McDino changeables are still legendary. And if you thought these were rare, remember the impossible challenge of beating the waterful ring toss? 46. Waterful ring toss, a game everyone had but no one could ever complete.
Waterfuls, wee waterfuls, and pocket waterfuls, all from Milton Bradley.
Waterful ring toss looked simple. Press the button to shoot tiny plastic rings onto pegs inside a water-filled case. But in reality, it was pure frustration. The rings never landed where you wanted. They floated just past the peg. And no matter how carefully you pressed the button, the water pressure had a mind of its own. Some kids claimed they mastered it, but we all knew the truth. Beating this game was a rare miracle. Still, it kept us entertained for hours. But if we're talking about frustrating toys, erasable pens were another childhood disappointment. 47th, Erasermate erasable pens, which never actually erased properly.
Erasermate, the erasable ballpoint pen.
These pens promised a revolutionary writing experience. You could write and erase ink. The problem? The ink barely erased at all. Instead of disappearing, it would smudge, tear the paper, or leave ghostly streaks behind. Erasermate pens were a disaster for schoolwork. You'd try fixing a mistake only to end up with an even bigger mess. Yet every 80s kid still had one in their pencil case, hoping this time it would actually work. But if writing technology let us down, one company had the fastest talking commercials we had ever heard. 48. Micro Machines commercials with John Mosqueda speaking ridiculously fast.
This This is the Micro Machine Man presenting the most midget miniature motorcade of Micro Machines.
One of the most iconic toy commercials of the 80s wasn't just about the toys. It was about how fast the guy talked. Micro Machines ads featured John Machida, the world's fastest talker, rapid-firing through an entire script at lightning speed. You barely understood what he was saying, but it felt important. And honestly, the commercials were better than the toys themselves. Every kid tried and failed to talk as fast as Machida, but he was untouchable. And speaking of iconic TV moments, the opening of Disney Sunday Night Movie was something we never missed. 49. The Disney Sunday Night Movie intro with Tinker Bell flying across the screen. Every Sunday night, Disney made TV feel like a trip to the movies. The second that majestic fanfare played and Tinker Bell flew across the castle, you knew you were in for something special. Whether it was Mary Poppins, The Parent Trap, or an animated classic, it was a big deal. Families would gather, kids got to stay up late, and the experience felt magical. It was event television before streaming ruined the thrill of waiting. But if Disney's Sunday Night Movie was pure excitement, one final nostalgic item from the 80s was pure terror. 50. The terrifying Unsolved Mysteries theme song that scared an entire generation. Some TV themes were comforting. This one, it sent chills down your spine. The moment Robert Stack's eerie voice came in, paired with that haunting synth music, it felt like a ghost was in the room with you. Even if you weren't watching, just hearing the theme from another room was enough to make you nervous. Some kids bravely stayed up for the whole episode, while others ran to turn off the TV before it started. Either way, the Unsolved Mysteries theme remains one of the most unintentionally terrifying things from the 80s.